The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped out of the transport vehicle. Her civilian clothes stood out among the sea of military uniforms that populated the base. She carried a simple duffel bag and wore practical boots. But nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged in this place of warriors and weapons. Colonel Marcus Steele watched from his office window as the woman approached the main building. He had received the orders from High Command just yesterday, and they still didn't make sense to him. Some scientist from the Terran Research Division wanted to test their experimental equipment at his facility. What bothered him most was the specific request for access to the firing ranges and his best marksman. The colonel had spent 30 years building his reputation in the Terran Defense Force. His base housed some of the most elite soldiers in human space, including a full squad of Navy SEALs fresh from successful missions in the Outer Rim. These weren't weekend warriors or academy graduates playing soldier. They were hardened veterans who had fought against alien incursions and won battles that kept humanity safe among the stars. Elena entered the administration building and was quickly escorted to the colonel's office. She knocked twice and entered when called. The colonel didn't look up from his datapad immediately, a small power play he often used with civilians who thought they could waltz onto his base and make demands. "Dr. Vasquez," he finally said, still not making eye contact, "I have to admit your request is unusual. My understanding is that you want to conduct some kind of experiment using our firing range facilities." Elena remained standing, noting that she hadn't been offered a seat. "That's correct, Colonel. I'm working on a project that requires testing under realistic conditions, with experienced military personnel present." Colonel Steele finally looked up, studying the woman before him. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and steady brown eyes that met his gaze without flinching. She was clearly in good physical condition, but nothing about her suggested military training or combat experience. "And what exactly is this project?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. The orders from command were frustratingly vague. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed folder marked with various classification symbols. "I'm not at liberty to discuss all the details, but I can tell you that it involves testing new targeting systems and accuracy enhancement technologies." The colonel opened the folder and scanned the contents. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read through the technical specifications and authorization codes. Whatever this woman was working on, it had backing from the highest levels of Terran command. These specifications mentioned testing against human baseline performance standards, he said, looking up from the documents. "What does that mean exactly?" Elena shifted slightly, choosing her words carefully. "I need to demonstrate the effectiveness of certain enhancements by comparing performance against unaugmented humans in controlled conditions." Colonel Steele set down the folder and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the training grounds. Below, he could see some of his soldiers running drills, their movements precise and coordinated. These were the best humanity had to offer, the tip of the spear in mankind's expansion into the galaxy. "Dr. Vasquez, I don't know what kind of equipment you're planning to test, but I want to be clear about something. The men and women under my command are not guinea pigs. They're professional soldiers with real jobs to do." Elena nodded respectfully. "I understand completely, Colonel. I'm not asking to experiment on your personnel. I simply need them to perform standard marksmanship tests while I conduct my own parallel testing." The colonel turned back to face her, his expression skeptical. "And what will you be doing during these tests?" "I'll be demonstrating the baseline performance metrics that my enhancement systems are designed to improve upon." Colonel Steele almost smiled at that. The idea of this civilian scientist trying to keep up with his trained marksman was almost amusing. His soldiers trained daily with weapons that could put holes in armored targets at distances measured in kilometers. They had fought in zero gravity, hostile atmospheres, and against enemies with reflexes faster than human normal. "Very well, Dr. Vasquez. We can arrange range time this afternoon. I'll have my best marksman available for your baseline comparisons." He paused, then added with just a hint of condescension, "I hope you're prepared for what you're going to see. My people don't miss." Elena smiled for the first time since entering the office. "I'm looking forward to it, Colonel." As she left the office, Colonel Steele shook his head and returned to his work. He made a note to have Sergeant Williams prepare the range and gather a few of the SEALs for what would likely be a very short demonstration. Whatever technology this scientist was peddling, She was about to get a reality check about the capabilities of Earth's finest warriors. The afternoon couldn't come soon enough. This would be entertaining, if nothing else. The firing range buzzed with activity when Colonel Steele arrived that afternoon. Sergeant Williams had assembled 6 of the base's top marksmen, including 3 Navy SEALs who had just returned from a classified mission in the Centauri system. These weren't just good soldiers. They were legends in their own right, each with confirmed kills against alien hostiles and precision scores that bordered on the impossible. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood near the equipment lockers, examining the various weapons available for testing. She had changed into more practical clothing, dark pants, boots, and a simple shirt that allowed for easy movement. Her duffel bag sat nearby, still unopened and mysterious. "Gentlemen," Colonel Steele announced as he approached the group, "this is Dr. Vasquez from the Terran Research Division. She's here to observe some marksmanship demonstrations for a project she's working on." The soldiers nodded politely, though Colonel Steele could see the curiosity in their eyes. It wasn't often that civilians visited their range, especially not for research purposes. Sergeant Williams stepped forward, a grizzled veteran with more than 20 years of service. "Sir, I've set up targets at standard distances, 100, 300, and 500 meters. We've also prepared the advanced course with moving targets and variable conditions." Elena watched as the soldiers began their preparations, noting how they handled their weapons with casual expertise. These men had clearly spent thousands of hours training, and their movements showed the kind of muscle memory that only came from constant practice. "Colonel," Elena said, approaching the commanding officer, "I was wondering if I might participate in the testing as well." The range suddenly became very quiet. Several of the soldiers exchanged glances, trying to hide their amusement. Colonel Steele stared at Elena for a long moment, then let out a short laugh. "Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't a carnival game. These are military-grade weapons being used by professional soldiers. The targets we're shooting at are designed to test combat-level marksmanship." Elena nodded understandingly. "I realize this might seem unusual, but my research requires me to establish personal baseline measurements. I need to demonstrate the starting point before the enhancements are applied." One of the SEALs, a compact man with the call sign Razor, couldn't suppress a grin.
"Ma'am, with all due respect, some of us have been shooting since we were kids."
"We train 8 hours a day with these weapons. This isn't really something you can pick up overnight." Colonel Steele was shaking his head before Elena even finished speaking. "Absolutely not. The liability alone would end my career. These weapons can kill at over a kilometer. One mistake and someone gets hurt." Elena reached into her bag and pulled out another set of documents. "I have full insurance coverage and liability waivers, all properly authorized. I also have certification for weapons handling from the Terran Defense Academy." The colonel took the papers, scanning them quickly. His expression grew more confused as he read. The certifications were real, and they were recent. More puzzling, they showed that Elena had passed advanced weapons training with scores that were adequate. Not impressive, but certainly sufficient for basic range safety. "Dr. Vasquez," he said slowly, "these certifications show basic proficiency, but what my men are about to demonstrate is several levels beyond basic. We're talking about precision shooting that most people couldn't achieve after years of training." Elena smiled again, that same calm expression she had worn in his office. "I understand the skill level involved, Colonel. I'm not expecting to match their performance. I just need to establish my own baseline for comparison purposes." Sergeant Williams stepped in, trying to be diplomatic. "Perhaps we could start with something simpler. Maybe the 100-meter targets with stationary positions?" The SEALs were trying not to laugh outright now. The idea of a civilian scientist thinking she could even hit targets at distances they considered trivial was genuinely amusing to them. They had seen plenty of cocky recruits get humbled on this same range. Colonel Steele looked at Elena's earnest expression and made a decision he would later regret. "Fine. Against my better judgment, we'll let you take a few shots at the closest targets. But you'll be using standard training rounds, and Sergeant Williams will be right next to you the entire time." Elena nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Colonel. That's all I need." The soldiers began setting up their demonstration, with the first shooter taking position at the 500-meter line. Elena watched carefully as he settled into his stance, controlling his breathing and adjusting his grip. The shot rang out across the range, and the electronic target system immediately displayed the result. A perfect bullseye. The second soldier stepped up and repeated the performance, his shot landing within millimeters of the first. The third achieved the same result, and the fourth. These weren't lucky shots. They were displaying the kind of consistent accuracy that separated elite soldiers from merely good ones. "Your turn, Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Steele said, gesturing toward the 100-meter line. "Let's see this baseline of yours." Elena walked calmly to the firing position, accepting the standard rifle from Sergeant Williams. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, though she gave no indication of her comfort level. The soldiers gathered behind her, expecting to see the kind of awkward fumbling they had witnessed from countless civilians over the years. What they saw instead would change everything. Elena lifted the rifle with movements that were both fluid and deliberate. There was no hesitation in her grip, no awkward fumbling with the controls that Sergeant Williams expected to see. She checked the weapon with quick, efficient motions that spoke of genuine familiarity. The soldiers behind her were still smiling, waiting for the inevitable moment when reality would set in. They had seen this before. Overconfident civilians who thought shooting was easy until they actually tried it. The rifle she held was a standard Terran Defense Force marksman weapon, capable of incredible accuracy in trained hands but unforgiving to amateurs. Elena settled into a shooting stance that made Sergeant Williams pause. Her position was textbook perfect. Feet properly spaced, weight distribution balanced, rifle tucked securely against her shoulder. Most civilians needed extensive coaching just to hold the weapon correctly. "Take your time, Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Steele called out, his tone still carrying that hint of amused condescension. "Remember, the target is 100 meters away. Just try to hit somewhere on the board." Elena controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught years ago in training that these soldiers knew nothing about. The target downrange looked exactly like the thousands she had engaged before, during practice sessions that had taken place far from any military base and under conditions these men couldn't imagine. The rifle cracked once, the sound echoing across the range. The electronic target system immediately processed the impact and displayed the result on screens visible to everyone present. The small group of soldiers suddenly became very quiet. "Dead center," Sergeant Williams announced, his voice lacking its previous casual tone. "Perfect bullseye at 100 meters. Colonel Steele stared at the display, then at Elena, then back at the display. "Lucky shot," he said, though his conviction was already wavering. "Take another one." Elena didn't hesitate. Her second shot followed immediately after the first, with barely enough time for her to reacquire the target. The result appeared on the screen just as quickly. Another perfect center hit so close to the first that the two holes nearly overlapped. The SEALs behind her had stopped grinning. These weren't lucky shots. They were seeing consistent accuracy that matched their own performance. Razor stepped closer, studying Elena's technique with professional interest. "Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Steele said carefully, "where exactly did you receive your weapons training?" Elena lowered the rifle and turned to face the group. "Various places, Colonel. My work has taken me to many different facilities over the years." That wasn't really an answer, and everyone present knew it. Sergeant Williams was still staring at the target display, calculating distances and angles in his head. What Elena had just accomplished required not just skill, but the kind of muscle memory that took months to develop. "Move her back to 300 meters, Colonel Steele ordered. There was no amusement in his voice now, only professional curiosity mixed with growing concern. Let's see if that was really baseline performance. The soldiers rearranged the firing line, and Elena moved to the new position without comment. The 300-meter targets were smaller and required significantly more precision. Wind factors began to matter at this distance, and even small errors in technique would result in missed shots. Elena accepted a fresh magazine from Sergeant Williams and chambered a round. This time she took slightly longer to aim, making minute adjustments to her scope settings with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. The shot rang out across the longer distance. The target system took a moment longer to process the impact at the greater range, but when the result appeared, it drew sharp intakes of breath from several of the watching soldiers. Another perfect center hit. "That's impossible," muttered one of the SEALs. "Nobody shoots that consistently without warm-up shots." Elena fired again and again, placing 5 shots in a group so tight that they formed a single ragged hole in the target center. Her breathing remained steady, her movements economical and precise. There was no visible effort in her performance, as if hitting targets at 300 meters was as natural as walking. Colonel Steele approached Elena's position, studying her technique up close. Her stance was perfect, her grip textbook, her breathing controlled. But there was something else. Something in the way she moved that suggested a level of training that went far beyond civilian certification courses. "Dr. Vasquez," he said quietly, "I think it's time you told us who you really are." Elena lowered the rifle and met his gaze directly. "I'm exactly who I said I was, Colonel. Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Terran Research Division." "That may be true," Razor interjected, stepping forward. "But that's not all you are. I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone pick up a rifle and perform like that without extensive training." Elena checked her weapon's safety and handed it back to Sergeant Williams. "I have had extensive training, Sergeant. Just not the kind that appears on standard military records." The implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke from the rifle barrels. Colonel Steele felt a chill run down his spine as he began to piece together possibilities he didn't want to consider. The Terran Research Division was known for many projects, but most of their work remained classified at levels he didn't have access to. 500 meters, he said suddenly. "If you can hit targets at 500 meters with the same accuracy, then we need to have a very different conversation about what you're really doing here." Elena nodded calmly. "I understand, Colonel, but I should warn you that 500 meters isn't really a challenge for me. If you want to see something impressive, you might want to set up targets at longer ranges." The soldiers exchanged glances. The woman standing before them had just suggested that hitting targets at combat distances was routine for her. Either she was bluffing on a massive scale, or they were dealing with someone whose capabilities went far beyond anything they had expected. Colonel Steele made a decision that would change everything. "Sergeant Williams, set up targets at 1,000 meters, and get me a communication link to Terran Command. I think we need some answers about Dr. Vasquez and her research project." The communication link crackled to life in Colonel Steele's office, while the soldiers prepared the 1,000-meter range. The voice on the other end belonged to General Harrison, Deputy Commander of Terran Defense Operations, and his tone suggested he had been expecting this call. "Colonel Steele," the general said without preamble, "I assume Dr. Vasquez has begun her demonstration?" "Sir, with respect, what exactly is going on here? This woman just put 5 shots through the same hole at 300 meters like she was shooting at targets in her backyard. My SEALs are starting to ask questions I can't answer." There was a pause on the communication channel, filled with the kind of silence that meant classified information was being considered. "Colonel, Dr. Vasquez is conducting authorized research under Project Prometheus. I can't give you details over this channel, but I can tell you that her capabilities are significant." "Significant how, sir?" "Let her complete her demonstration, Colonel. Then you'll understand why she's there." The channel closed, leaving Colonel Steele with more questions than answers. He returned to the range to find his soldiers setting up targets at distances that were normally reserved for sniper training. The 1,000-meter range pushed the limits of what their facility could accommodate, requiring targets placed at the far end of the valley that housed the base. Elena waited patiently while the preparations continued, showing no signs of nervousness about the increased distance. If anything, she seemed more relaxed now that the pretense of being a simple civilian observer was beginning to fade. "Dr. Vasquez," Sergeant Williams called out, "the targets are ready. I should mention that at this distance we're dealing with wind factors, elevation changes, and atmospheric conditions that can affect bullet trajectory. Even our best snipers need spotting assistance and multiple ranging shots." Elena nodded appreciatively. "Thank you for the warning, Sergeant. May I borrow your rangefinder?" Razor handed over the electronic device, watching as Elena took readings not just to the target, but to several points along the trajectory path. She checked wind indicators and made notes on a small pad, performing calculations that suggested a deeper understanding of ballistics than her simple certification should have provided. "Ma'am?" one of the younger SEALs asked hesitantly. "Have you shot at this distance before?" Elena looked up from her calculations. "Once or twice." That answer sent ripples of unease through the group. Shooting accurately at 1,000 meters wasn't something people did casually. It required specialized training, expensive equipment, and hundreds of hours of practice. The fact that Elena treated it as routine suggested backgrounds that civilian researchers simply didn't have. Colonel Steele watched Elena accept a high-precision rifle from his armorer. Noting how she examined the weapon with the practiced eye of an expert, she adjusted the scope settings with quick, confident movements. Test-fired a single round into the backstop to check the rifle's zero, then declared herself ready. The target at 1,000 meters looked impossibly small through the spotting scopes the soldiers were using. At that distance, a perfect shot required accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, air density, and even the rotation of the planet beneath the trajectory. It was the kind of shooting that separated snipers from ordinary marksmen. Elena settled into position with the same calm efficiency she had shown at shorter ranges. But now the soldiers could see additional details in her technique. The way she positioned her body to minimize the effects of her own pulse, how she used her breathing to time her shots, the micro-adjustments she made to compensate for environmental factors. The rifle cracked once, its report echoing across the valley. At 1,000 meters, there was a noticeable delay before the electronic target system registered the impact. When it did, the display showed another perfect center hit. "Impossible," breathed Sergeant Williams. "Nobody makes that shot without warm-up rounds." Elena fired again and again, placing shot after shot into the target center with mechanical precision. The group of impacts formed a pattern so tight that they would have been impressive at 100 meters, let alone 1,000. She was shooting like someone who had made similar shots thousands of times. Before Colonel Steele found himself staring at a woman who was demonstrating capabilities that matched or exceeded his best snipers, people who trained full-time and had years of combat experience. The implications were staggering. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "I need to ask you directly, are you currently, or have you ever been, a member of any military organization?" Elena lowered the rifle and met his gaze. "No, Colonel. I've never been a member of any traditional military organization." The emphasis on traditional wasn't lost on anyone present. Colonel Steele felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind, forming a picture he didn't like. "What about non-traditional organizations?" Razor asked bluntly. Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "My work with the Terran Research Division has required specialized training in various fields. Marksmanship is one of those fields." "What kind of research requires this level of weapons training?" Colonel Steele demanded. Elena began disassembling the rifle with practiced efficiency, her movements showing the kind of muscle memory that came from handling weapons daily for years. "The kind of research that takes place in hostile environments, Colonel. The kind that requires researchers to be able to defend themselves against threats that conventional security can't handle." Sergeant Williams stepped closer, his expression serious. "What kind of threats?" Elena finished securing the rifle and turned to face the group of soldiers. For the first time since arriving at the base, she allowed them to see something beyond the calm, professional demeanor she had maintained. There was steel in her eyes now, and something else. The look of someone who had seen combat and survived, the kind that doesn't always come from human enemies, she said quietly. The range fell silent except for the distant sound of wind across the valley. Every soldier present understood the implications of that statement. Humanity's expansion into space had brought them into contact with hostile alien species, and some of those encounters had resulted in conflicts that never made it into public records. Colonel Steele felt his perspective shifting as he began to understand what he was really dealing with. "Dr. Vasquez, exactly what is Project Prometheus?" Elena checked her watch and reached for her duffel bag. "Colonel, I think it's time to show you what I'm really capable of. But for that demonstration, we're going to need targets at much longer ranges." Elena opened her duffel bag for the first time since arriving at the base, revealing contents that made several of the soldiers take involuntary steps backward. Inside was a rifle unlike anything in the standard Terran Defense Force arsenal. The weapon was sleek and angular, with design elements that seemed almost organic in their curves and integration. "Jesus Christ," Razor whispered. "What is that thing?" Elena lifted the rifle carefully, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood its true capabilities. "This is a prototype weapon developed through Project Prometheus. It incorporates technology recovered from foreign sources." Colonel Steele knew exactly what foreign sources meant in the context of classified military projects. During humanity's expansion into space, they had encountered several alien species, and not all of those encounters had been peaceful. Some had resulted in the acquisition of technology that human scientists were still struggling to understand. Dr. Vasquez, Colonel Steele said slowly, "Are you telling me that weapon uses alien technology?" Elena checked the rifle's systems with practiced movements, her fingers dancing over controls that seemed to respond to her touch in ways that suggested biological integration rather than mechanical operation. "Not alien technology, Colonel. Enhanced human technology. Project Prometheus isn't about studying alien weapons. It's about creating humans who can use them effectively." The implications of that statement hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. They were looking at someone who had been modified, enhanced, turned into something more than baseline human. The perfect marksmanship they had witnessed wasn't just the result of training. It was the product of deliberate augmentation. Sergeant Williams found his voice first. "Enhanced how?" Elena's smile was sad rather than proud. "Reflexes improved by a factor of 3. Visual acuity enhanced to allow for target identification at distances exceeding 5 kilometers. Neurological modifications that allow for real-time ballistic calculations. Muscle memory and coding that provides instant familiarity with any projectile weapon." She paused, looking at each of the soldiers in turn, "and emotional dampening that allows for efficient target elimination without hesitation or trauma." Colonel Steele felt a chill run down his spine. He was looking at a weapon in human form, someone who had been deliberately modified to become the perfect soldier. The casual way Elena described her enhancements suggested that she had long since accepted what had been done to her. "How many others are there?" he asked. "The Prometheus project has produced 47 successful subjects over the past 8 years. We operate in small teams, usually deployed to handle situations that conventional forces can't manage." Razor stepped closer, studying Elena with the professional interest of someone who recognized a fellow warrior. "What kind of situations?" Elena's expression grew distant, as if she were remembering missions that she wished she could forget. "Alien incursions in the Outer Rim territories. First contact scenarios that go hostile. Retrieval of human survivors from hostile alien environments. Elimination of alien threats that have infiltrated human colonies." The range had become completely silent. These soldiers thought they knew what warfare looked like. But Elena was describing conflicts that existed beyond their experience and clearance level. "The reason I'm here," Elena continued, "is to test new integration protocols. The weapon I'm carrying represents the next generation of human-alien technology hybridization. Command wants to know if our enhancements are sufficient to handle weapons that are even more advanced than what we currently use." Colonel Steele watched Elena configure her alien hybrid weapon, noting interfaces that seemed to respond to her thoughts rather than physical controls. "And if they're not sufficient?" Elena's smile disappeared entirely. "Then they'll enhance us further, or they'll create new subjects who can handle the increased technological integration." The casual way she discussed being treated as an experimental subject spoke volumes about what the Prometheus project really represented. These weren't soldiers who had volunteered for enhancement. They were people who had been selected, modified, and turned into living weapons for humanity's defense. "What are you planning to demonstrate with that weapon?" Sergeant Williams asked, eyeing the alien technology with obvious concern. Elena made final adjustments to her rifle and looked out across the valley toward the distant mountains that ringed the base. "The current test parameters call for target engagement at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers under variable environmental conditions." 3 kilometers was beyond the capability of any standard military rifle. It was a distance that required specialized equipment, perfect conditions, and extraordinary skill even for the best snipers in human space. "There are no targets at that range," Colonel Steele pointed out. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a telescope and a targeting computer. "There will be." The device activated with a soft hum, projecting a holographic display that showed the terrain features around the base in 3-dimensional detail. Elena manipulated the controls, and small red dots appeared at various locations throughout the display. "Automated target drones," she explained. "They've been positioned around the base perimeter for the past week, waiting for activation. Each drone is designed to simulate alien threat signatures and movement patterns." Colonel Steele stared at the display, realizing that his base had been under surveillance by devices he never knew existed. "You've been planning this demonstration for a week?" Elena nodded. "Project Prometheus doesn't do anything without extensive preparation, Colonel. We've been monitoring your facility, your personnel, and your security protocols since the moment I was assigned this mission." Razor stepped closer to the holographic display, studying the target locations. "These positions are all in areas that would provide tactical advantage for a hostile force. You're not just testing marksmanship, you're demonstrating counter-infiltration capabilities." Elena met his gaze directly. "Very good, Sergeant. You're beginning to understand what we really do." Colonel Steele felt the last pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You're not here to test equipment. You're here to evaluate whether conventional forces like mine would be effective against enhanced human operatives." Elena's silence was answer enough. The Prometheus project wasn't just creating weapons to fight aliens. They were creating soldiers who could operate independently of conventional military command structures. And now they were testing whether those soldiers could outperform the best that regular human forces had to offer. "Show us," Colonel Steele said quietly. "Show us what you can really do." Elena activated the targeting system, and the holographic display showed dozens of red dots scattered across the mountainous terrain surrounding the base. Each dot represented a target drone positioned at distances ranging from 2 to 5 kilometers, hidden among rocks, trees, and elevation changes that would challenge even the most advanced targeting systems. "Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Steele said, his voice tight with tension, "those targets are beyond visual range. How do you expect to engage them?" Elena's enhanced rifle hummed to life as she powered up its integrated systems. The weapon's scope unfolded like a flower, revealing multiple lenses and sensors that began scanning the environment with inhuman precision. "Enhanced visual cortex modifications allow me to process electromagnetic spectrum data that baseline humans can't perceive, Colonel. I can see targets that your equipment can't even detect." She shouldered the rifle with movements that seemed to flow like water, every motion perfectly economical and precisely controlled. The weapon seemed to merge with her body, becoming an extension of her enhanced nervous system rather than a separate tool. "First target," Elena announced calmly. "Range 247 meters. Elevation 312 meters above firing position. Wind speed 14 kilometers per hour, variable direction. Target is mobile, and currently moving at 3.2 meters per second." The soldiers stared through their spotting scopes and saw nothing but empty mountainside. Even with their best optical equipment, they couldn't identify whatever Elena was preparing to engage. The alien hybrid rifle made no sound when it fired. There was no muzzle flash, no recoil that Elena needed to compensate for. The weapon simply delivered its projectile with technology that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics. "Target eliminated," Elena reported 3 seconds later. Sergeant Williams was frantically scanning the mountainside with his scope. "I don't see anything." "How do we know you hit anything?" Elena manipulated her targeting display, and one of the red dots flickered and disappeared. "Target drone 7 Alpha has ceased transmitting. Projectile impact confirmed." She smoothly transitioned to her next target, her movements flowing with mechanical precision. "Second target. Range 356 meters. Target is airborne. Altitude 47 meters, speed 12 meters per second." The rifle fired again and another red dot vanished from the display. "Third target. Range 4,203 meters. Target is partially concealed behind terrain features." Another silent shot. Another eliminated target. Elena continued engaging targets with methodical efficiency, her rate of fire increasing as she settled into the rhythm of the demonstration. Each shot was preceded by a brief tactical analysis delivered in the same calm voice. Each impact confirmed by the disappearance of target signatures from her display. The soldiers watching began to understand that they were witnessing something that transcended normal human capability. Elena wasn't just shooting accurately at impossible ranges. She was engaging multiple targets simultaneously, processing environmental data in real time, and compensating for factors that would overwhelm an unenhanced human mind. "Jesus," Razor breathed, watching the target display as red dots disappeared with mechanical regularity. "She's engaging targets faster than our computer systems could calculate firing solutions." Colonel Steele was beginning to grasp the true implications of what Elena represented. The Prometheus project hadn't just created enhanced soldiers. They had created beings who operated on a level that made conventional military forces obsolete. Target 23, Elena announced. Range 4,891 meters, multiple targets in formation, moving in coordinated pattern. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession so quickly that the individual reports blended together. 3 red dots vanished simultaneously from the display. How is that possible? Sergeant Williams asked. Nobody can acquire and engage 3 separate targets that quickly. Elena lowered her rifle for a moment and turned to face the group. Enhanced reaction time allows me to process targeting data at roughly 3 times normal human speed. The weapon's integrated targeting system provides real-time ballistic calculations directly to my visual cortex. I don't aim in the traditional sense. I simply think about where I want the projectile to go. The casual way she described abilities that bordered on supernatural sent chills through the assembled soldiers. They were looking at someone who had been transformed into something that was technically still human, but operated on a completely different level of capability. Final demonstration, Elena announced, returning to her firing position. Simultaneous engagement of all remaining targets. The display showed 15 red dots scattered across the mountainous terrain. Engaging them one at a time would be impressive. Engaging them simultaneously was theoretically impossible. Elena's rifle began making subtle adjustments to its configuration, internal systems recalibrating for what appeared to be some kind of advanced firing mode. The weapon's multiple sensors swept across the landscape, gathering data and calculating trajectories for multiple projectiles. This is impossible, Colonel Steele said flatly. No weapon can engage 15 separate targets simultaneously. Elena smiled for the first time since beginning her demonstration, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Colonel, you're thinking in terms of conventional weapons technology. This rifle incorporates recovered alien targeting systems, enhanced human reflexes, and projectile technology that your science teams are still trying to understand. The weapon fired once, but the sound was different, a complex harmonic that suggested multiple projectiles being launched through some kind of technological process that defied easy explanation. On the targeting display, all 15 remaining red dots flickered and disappeared within a span of 2.3 seconds. The range fell completely silent. The soldiers stared at Elena, then at the display, then back at Elena, trying to process what they had just witnessed. She had engaged and eliminated 38 targets at ranges exceeding 5 kilometers, including a final simultaneous engagement that violated every principle of conventional weapons. Technology. Elena powered down her weapon and began disassembling it with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the demonstration. Baseline testing complete, Colonel. I believe your assessment of human defensive capabilities against enhanced operatives is now complete as well. Colonel Steele found his voice after a long moment. Dr. Vasquez, what you've just demonstrated, it changes everything. If the Prometheus Project can create soldiers with these capabilities, then conventional military forces are effectively obsolete. Elena packed her weapon back into its case, her expression thoughtful. That's not necessarily true, Colonel. Enhanced humans like myself are expensive to create, difficult to maintain, and psychologically unstable over long periods. We're not meant to replace conventional forces. We're meant to handle threats that conventional forces can't engage. She paused, looking out across the valley where her demonstration had taken place. But you're right about one thing. What I've shown you today does change everything. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? The debriefing room was quieter than Colonel Steele had ever experienced it. For the first time in his military career, he found himself struggling to write a report about events that seemed to belong in science fiction rather than reality. Across from him, Elena sat calmly, having returned to her civilian clothes and demeanor as if the previous hours had been routine. The soldiers who had witnessed the demonstration were scattered around the room, each dealing with the implications in their own way. Sergeant Williams kept checking and rechecking the target data, as if repeated examination might reveal some explanation for what they had seen. The SEALs sat in uncharacteristic silence, veterans of impossible missions who had just been shown that their definition of impossible needed revision. Dr. Vasquez, Colonel Steele began, setting down his datapad. I need to understand something. If Project Prometheus has created 47 soldiers with your capabilities, why isn't this public knowledge? Why are conventional forces like mine still operating under the assumption that we represent humanity's primary defense? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. Because the existence of enhanced humans like myself raises questions that humanity isn't ready to answer, Colonel. If the government admits that some humans have been deliberately modified to this extent, it forces uncomfortable conversations about who gets enhanced, who makes those decisions, and what happens to the people who undergo the process. She gestured toward the window overlooking the base, where normal soldiers continued their training routines, unaware of what had transpired on the range. Your people represent the heart of human military capability. Courage, training, determination, and the ability to work together toward common goals. Enhanced humans like myself are tools created for specific purposes. We're not better than your soldiers. We're just different. Razor leaned forward, his expression serious. But you are better in measurable ways. Your reflexes, your accuracy, your ability to process information, everything about your performance exceeds what unenhanced humans can achieve. Elena nodded sadly. Yes, in certain narrow parameters I perform better than baseline humans. But I've also lost things that you take for granted. The emotional dampening that allows me to eliminate targets without hesitation also makes it difficult for me to form meaningful relationships. The enhanced reflexes that make me an effective soldier also make normal human interactions feel sluggish and frustrating. She paused, her expression growing distant. Most Prometheus subjects have difficulty maintaining connections with unenhanced humans. We become isolated, dependent on each other and our handlers for social contact. The dropout rate from psychological stress is significant. Colonel Steele was beginning to understand the true cost of the enhancements Elena had undergone. How long have you been enhanced? 4 years, 3 months, 12 days, Elena replied immediately, then caught herself. The precision with which I track time is another side effect. Enhanced memory retention makes it difficult to forget anything, including experiences I'd prefer not to remember. Sergeant Williams looked up from his data analysis. What kind of experiences? Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Prometheus subjects are deployed against threats that conventional forces can't handle. Alien species with reflexes faster than human normal. Hostile environments where enhanced durability is required for survival. Situations where the psychological cost of necessary actions would be too high for unenhanced soldiers. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Elena was describing missions that required her to do things that would traumatize normal soldiers. And she had been specifically modified to handle that psychological burden. The demonstration today wasn't really about testing my capabilities, Elena continued. Command already knows what I can do. This was about showing conventional forces what enhanced humans represent, and gauging your reaction to that knowledge. Colonel Steele felt pieces clicking together in his mind. They're evaluating whether to expand the Prometheus project. Elena nodded. The success rate for enhancement procedures has improved significantly over the past 2 years. The psychological integration protocols are more stable. The technology recovered from alien sources is better understood. Command is considering scaling up production of enhanced humans. And they wanted to see how we'd react to learning about it, Razor said grimly. Partly, but they also wanted to demonstrate that enhanced humans aren't a replacement for conventional forces. We're a specialized tool for specific problems. Your training, your teamwork, your ability to adapt to unexpected situations, those qualities can't be enhanced or programmed. They have to be learned through experience. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the soldiers training in the distance. The truth is, Colonel, enhanced humans like myself need people like you. We need the stability that comes from working with individuals who haven't been modified. We need the perspective that comes from interacting with humans who still experience the full range of emotions and motivations. Colonel Steele joined her at the window. What happens now? You'll file your report. Command will read it and make decisions about the future of the Prometheus project, based partly on your recommendations. The knowledge of enhanced humans will be restricted to personnel with appropriate clearance levels. She turned to face him directly. But more importantly, you'll continue training your soldiers to be the best conventional forces in human space. Because no matter how many enhanced humans Command creates, there will always be situations that require people who chose to serve, rather than people who were modified to serve. The room was quiet as the soldiers absorbed the implications of everything they had learned. They had witnessed capabilities that redefined their understanding of human potential, but they had also learned about the costs associated with achieving those capabilities. "Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Steele said finally, "thank you for the demonstration, and for the honesty about what it represents." Elena collected her bag and prepared to leave. "Colonel, there's one more thing you should know. Every enhanced human in the Prometheus project volunteered for the process. We knew the risks and we accepted them because we believe in protecting humanity's future among the stars." She paused at the door. "The soldiers under your command make that same choice every day, without enhancements, without guarantees, and without losing their essential humanity in the process. Don't ever let anyone tell you that makes them inferior." As Elena left the debriefing room, Colonel Steele found himself looking at his soldiers with new appreciation. They had been shaken by what they witnessed, but they hadn't been broken by it. They remained fundamentally human in ways that enhanced operatives like Elena could no longer claim. And perhaps, he realized, that was humanity's greatest strength after all.